The laughter inside Bahari Grand Hotel grew louder as the homeless old man bent down to pick up the bread someone had thrown onto the polished floor. Wealthy guests watched him with disgust, while hotel workers lowered their eyes in silence. But manager Jabari Matemvu was not satisfied. "Get this filthy man out of my hotel," he shouted before grabbing the old beggar by the collar and shoving him violently down the front steps. The old man crashed onto the concrete as people gasped. Only one person moved. A poor waitress named Mwanajuma ran toward him and knelt beside his trembling body, while everyone else stood frozen in fear. What nobody inside that luxury hotel knew was that the broken old man they humiliated was actually Mzee Baraka Mwini, the billionaire owner of the entire empire. And before the next sunrise, someone powerful would lose everything. Before we continue, tell me which country you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And if you enjoy emotional African stories filled with justice, hope, and powerful life lessons, don't forget to subscribe. Every evening, just before sunset painted the sky above Dar es Salaam orange and gold, Mwanajuma stood silently near the service entrance of Bahari Grand Hotel and watched rich people arrive in expensive cars. Some stepped out laughing while speaking English with foreign accents. Others walked slowly across the polished marble entrance while security guards bowed respectfully beside the glass doors. Women covered in jewelry handed their car keys to attendants without even looking at them. Men in expensive suits talked loudly about business deals worth more money than Mwanajuma could earn in 10 years. Inside the hotel, cold air from giant ceiling vents carried the scent of imported perfume, roasted meat, and polished wood. Outside, street children begged beside the traffic lights. The difference between those two worlds was only a few meters, but for Mwanajuma, it felt like an entire universe. At 24 years old, she had already learned that poverty could make people invisible. Every morning before sunrise, she left the overcrowded neighborhood of Tandale, wearing her faded waitress uniform, and boarded a crowded Daladala bus into the city center. She spent almost 2 hours standing between exhausted workers and sweating passengers before finally arriving at Bahari Grand Hotel. And every night she returned home with aching feet carrying leftover bread hidden carefully inside her bag for her younger brother Salaam and her sick mother Birahema. That evening, Mwanajuma balanced a heavy tray of drinks while rushing through the crowded restaurant hall. Wealthy guests filled the dining area before an important tourism conference scheduled for the weekend. "Table 12 is still waiting," shouted one supervisor. "Move faster," yelled another. Mwanajuma apologized softly as she hurried past. Her body was exhausted, but fear kept her moving. Nobody inside Bahari Grand Hotel feared unemployment more than the lower workers, especially under manager Jabari Mtemvu. Jabari was a tall man with sharp cheekbones, expensive watches, and a permanent expression of irritation. He cared deeply about appearances, polished floors, smiling staff, wealthy clients, and perfect online reviews. To him, poor people were ugly reminders of failure, and he hated reminders of failure. "Remember this," he often told employees during meetings. "Guests are paying for luxury. Nobody wants to see poverty near this hotel." The workers always nodded silently. Nobody dared challenge him. Not after what happened to a cleaner named Nima last year. She had been fired publicly for allowing a homeless child to use the hotel bathroom. Since then, fear controlled everyone. Everyone except Mwanajuma. Not because she was brave, but because she understood hunger too well. That night, while carrying empty glasses toward the kitchen, she noticed movement outside the front entrance. An old man sat quietly near one of the large flower pots beside the hotel steps. His clothes were old and dusty. His gray beard looked uneven, and his sandals were nearly broken. Yet despite his appearance, there was something strangely calm about him. He did not beg. He did not disturb anyone. He simply sat there watching the hotel. Some guests walked around him with disgust. Others laughed openly. One young businessman tossed a coin onto the ground near the old man's feet without stopping. The old man never reached for it. Mwanajuma slowed her steps. For a moment their eyes met through the glass entrance doors. The old man looked tired. Not dangerous. Not drunk. Just deeply tired. "Why are you standing there?" Mwanajuma nearly jumped. Jabari stood behind her with crossed arms. I was just checking outside, sir. You are paid to work, not stare at beggars." His voice was cold enough to freeze the air around them. Jabari turned toward the security guards near the entrance. "Remove him." Two guards immediately walked outside. Mwanajuma watched silently as they approached the old man. "You can't stay here," one guard said roughly. The old man nodded slowly and struggled to stand. But before he could walk away, one of the guards pushed his shoulder impatiently. Guests nearby laughed softly. Mwanajuma felt something twist painfully inside her chest. The old man nearly lost balance before steadying himself against the flower pot. And still, he said nothing. No anger, no insults, only silence. Jabari noticed Mwanajuma watching. "If you feel sorry for him," he said mockingly, "take him to your house." Several workers nearby laughed nervously to please the manager. Mwanajuma lowered her eyes, but shame burned through her entire body. Later that night, after most guests had finished dinner, Mwanajuma entered the kitchen storage room quietly. She looked around carefully before wrapping 2 bread rolls grilled chicken and a bottle of water inside a small paper bag. Her hands trembled. If Jabari discovered this, she could lose her job immediately. But then she remembered the old man's eyes, and she kept packing the food. Outside, the city air had grown cooler. Traffic lights reflected across wet roads, while music echoed faintly from distant bars and street vendors. Mwanajuma walked carefully around the side of the hotel until she found the old man sitting beside a low wall near the parking entrance. For a moment she hesitated, then she stepped closer. "Baba," she said softly. The old man looked up slowly. She held out the paper bag. "I brought you some food." For several seconds he simply stared at her as if shocked someone had spoken kindly to him. "You should eat before the guards see you," Mwanajuma whispered. The old man accepted the bag carefully. His hands were rough and trembling. "Thank you," he said quietly. His voice sounded educated, calm, controlled, not what Mwanajuma expected. "You don't have to thank me." "Yes," he replied gently. "I do." She smiled weakly. Up close, she noticed how exhausted he looked. There were deep lines beneath his eyes, and his face carried a sadness that felt older than poverty itself. "What is your name?" he asked. "Mwanajuma." "A beautiful name." She looked embarrassed. "And yours?" The old man paused briefly. "Baraka." Before she could answer, a furious voice exploded behind them. "Mwanajuma." Her blood turned cold instantly. Jabari stormed across the parking area toward them. 2 security guards followed behind him. "I knew it," Jabari snapped. "Feeding beggars with hotel food?" "No, sir," Mwanajuma stammered. "It was leftover food. I don't care." Several workers nearby stopped walking to watch. Jabari pointed aggressively toward the old man. "You people encourage these street parasites. Tomorrow, 10 more will come." Baraka slowly lowered the food bag onto his lap. "I was leaving," he said calmly. "You don't speak here," Jabari shouted. Then he turned back toward Mwanajuma. "Do you know how easy it is to replace a waitress?" Fear spread through her stomach. She thought about her mother lying sick at home, about unpaid hospital bills, about Salaam needing school fees. Tears filled her eyes immediately. "I'm sorry, sir." Jabari stepped closer. "One more mistake," he hissed, "and you are finished in this hotel." The parking area fell silent. Mwanajuma lowered her head in humiliation while workers watched helplessly. But behind Jabari's anger, something else was happening. Baraka was watching carefully, watching Mwanajuma, watching Jabari, watching every face filled with fear. And for the first time since arriving at Bahari Grand Hotel, the old billionaire finally understood how deeply cruelty had poisoned the place he once built with pride. Long after midnight, the narrow streets of Tandale were still awake. Music echoed from small roadside bars. Motorcycle engines rattled through potholes filled with dirty water. Women selling roasted cassava shouted prices beneath flickering lanterns, while tired workers slowly returned home carrying plastic bags filled with rice onions and cooking oil. Mwanajuma walked carefully through the crowded pathways with aching legs and swollen feet. Her waitress shoes had started separating at the soles weeks ago, and every step against the uneven ground sent pain through her body. But she kept moving because home was waiting, or rather responsibility was waiting. When she finally reached the small 2-room house made of cracked cement walls and rusted roofing sheets, she paused outside for a moment to breathe. Inside, she could already hear coughing. Her mother. Mwanajuma closed her eyes briefly before entering. The room smelled faintly of medicine charcoal smoke and damp clothes drying on a rope near the window. A weak yellow bulb hung from exposed wiring overhead. B. Rahema lay on a thin mattress in the corner, wrapped beneath an old blanket despite the humid heat. Her coughing had become worse during the past month. Salaam sat beside her doing homework under the dim light. The boy looked up immediately when Mwanajuma entered. "You're late again," he said quietly. "There were many guests tonight." Mwanajuma forced a tired smile and placed her small bag onto the floor. Salaam stood quickly. "Did they give leftovers?" She nodded. The boy's face brightened instantly. For a moment, guilt stabbed through her chest. A 14-year-old child should not feel excited over leftover bread from strangers, but hunger had a way of shrinking dreams. Mwanajuma removed wrapped bread and pieces of roasted chicken from her bag while Salaam hurried to prepare plates. Birahema slowly opened her eyes. "You should stop bringing hotel food home every night," she whispered weakly. "One day they will catch you." Mwanajuma knelt beside her mother carefully. "They throw most of it away anyway. That does not make it yours." Her mother's voice remained soft but firm. Even sickness had not taken away her dignity. Mwanajuma gently touched B. Rahema's forehead. The fever was still there. "Did you take your medicine?" B. Rahema hesitated. That silence told Mwanajuma everything. "You skipped it again." "There are only 3 tablets left," her mother admitted quietly. "You need money for transport too." Frustration burned behind Mwanajuma's eyes. "The doctor said you cannot stop taking them. The doctor also said we owe the clinic more money." Nobody spoke after that. Outside, distant laughter drifted through the neighborhood while generators hummed across nearby houses. Inside the small room, hopelessness sat heavily between them. Salaam finally broke the silence. "Mama," he said softly, "my teacher said if I don't pay exam fees before Friday, I cannot sit for the national tests." Birahema closed her eyes slowly. Mwanajuma stared down at the floor. Another problem, another bill, another impossible choice. How much, she asked quietly. 30,000 shillings. It might as well have been 3 million. Mwanajuma forced herself to nod calmly. "We will find it somehow." But inside, fear tightened around her heart. After dinner, Salaam fell asleep beside his school books, while B. Rahema drifted into restless, coughing sleep. Mwanajuma remained awake. She sat near the window staring outside at the dark neighborhood while thinking about the old man from the hotel. Baraka. Something about him continued troubling her thoughts. Most homeless people around the city begged desperately for money or food, but that old man carried himself differently, quietly, carefully, almost proudly. And his eyes, those eyes did not belong to someone broken by the streets. They looked like eyes carrying secrets. The next morning, Mwanajuma woke before dawn and boarded another overcrowded dala into the city. The heat inside the bus was unbearable. Passengers pressed shoulder to shoulder while drivers shouted for more people to squeeze inside. By the time she arrived near Bahari Grand Hotel, sweat soaked through the back of her uniform. Luxury rose around her immediately. Tall glass buildings, clean sidewalks, foreign tourists carrying expensive luggage. It always amazed her how quickly Dar es Salaam could transform between neighborhoods. At the hotel entrance, 2 waitresses whispered nervously while arranging flowers near reception. "Did you hear?" one said quietly. "Hear what?" "They say the old beggar returned again last night after closing." The other woman frowned. "Maybe he is mad. Or dangerous," another worker added while polishing glasses nearby. "Manager Jabari says these street people steal from guests." Mwanajuma stayed silent while listening. Deep inside, she already knew most workers repeated Jabari's opinions because fear made people cruel. It was safer to agree than to think for yourself. Around midday, Jabari gathered staff for inspection inside the main restaurant hall. He walked slowly between tables while searching for faults. "This place must remain perfect," he announced sharply. "Important investors are arriving soon. I will not tolerate embarrassment." His eyes suddenly landed on Mwanajuma. "And you," he said coldly, "do not let me catch you feeding beggars again." Several employees lowered their eyes awkwardly. Mwanajuma felt heat spread across her face. "Yes, sir." Jabari stared at her for several seconds longer before finally walking away. But humiliation followed her throughout the day like a shadow. That evening, after work ended, Mwanajuma stepped outside through the side employee entrance. The air smelled of traffic smoke and grilled meat from nearby food stalls. And there he was again. Baraka sat quietly beside a low concrete wall across the street. Some teenagers walking past laughed at him openly. One man muttered insults under his breath. Baraka ignored all of them. Mwanajuma hesitated before crossing the road. "You came back," she said softly. Baraka looked up and smiled faintly. "It seems your manager dislikes me very much." Despite herself, Mwanajuma laughed quietly for the first time that day. "He dislikes almost everyone." Baraka studied her carefully. "You look tired." She shrugged. "Life is expensive. And still you help strangers. I know what hunger feels like." The old man became silent after that. A strange sadness passed through his eyes. Before he could answer, loud voices suddenly interrupted them. Two hotel guards approached aggressively. "You again," one snapped at Baraka. "We warned you already." "I'm leaving," Baraka replied calmly. But the second guard kicked lightly at the small cloth bag beside him. "Go sleep somewhere else." Mwanajuma stepped forward immediately. "He's not disturbing anyone." The guards looked shocked. "Do you want problems with management?" one asked her. Fear flashed through her body instantly. Of course she feared Jabari. She feared losing her salary. She feared eviction. She feared her mother dying without treatment. But at that moment, something stronger than fear rose inside her. Shame. Because everyone kept treating this old man like garbage, simply for being poor. "He's still a human being," Mwanajuma said quietly. One guard laughed mockingly. "Then take him home." The men walked away still laughing. Baraka watched Mwanajuma silently. "You should not risk your job for someone like me. What kind of person is that, a useless old beggar?" Mwanajuma shook her head immediately. "No human being is useless." Those words struck Baraka harder than she realized. Because, for the first time in many years, someone was speaking to him without fear, greed, or calculation. Only humanity. Night slowly settled over the city. Streetlights flickered on across the busy roads while distant music drifted through the warm air. Baraka looked weak beneath the fading light, and suddenly Mwanajuma noticed something else. He was shivering slightly. "You don't have a blanket, do you?" she asked quietly. Baraka avoided answering. That silence was enough. Without another word, Mwanajuma stood. "Wait here." Nearly an hour later, after traveling back home and arguing gently with herself the entire journey, she returned carrying a folded brown blanket wrapped carefully inside plastic. It had belonged to her late father, the only thick blanket left in their house. Baraka stared at it in shock. "You cannot give me this." "Yes, I can. But your family?" "My mother still has one blanket?" Mwanajuma interrupted softly. "You have none." The old man slowly accepted it with trembling hands. For the first time since arriving outside Bahari Grand Hotel, emotion visibly cracked through his calm expression. And while traffic rushed past them under the city lights, the hidden billionaire sitting beside the road suddenly felt something he had not felt in years. Not power, not respect, not control, but genuine human kindness. At 4:30 every morning before the first employees arrived at Bahari Grand Hotel, a black luxury SUV parked quietly inside an underground garage 3 streets away. Nobody inside the hotel knew about it. Nobody knew the driver waiting patiently behind the steering wheel was head of private security for one of East Africa's largest business empires. And nobody would have believed the tired, homeless old man sleeping near the roadside carried more wealth than most politicians in Tanzania. Mzee Baraka. Mwini sat alone inside the parked SUV that morning, no longer wearing torn sandals or dusty clothes. Instead, he wore a perfectly tailored dark suit while reviewing documents spread across his lap. Financial reports, internal complaints, employee records, photographs. Beside him sat Nima Kweka, the company's chief legal officer, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who had worked beside Baraka for nearly 20 years. "You were outside again last night," she said carefully. Baraka continued reading. "Yes." Nima sighed quietly. "You are 71 years old. Sleeping on streets to investigate your own hotel chain is madness." Perhaps you could have ordered a formal audit months ago. Baraka finally looked up. And what would happen? He asked calmly. Corrupt managers would hide evidence. Workers would remain afraid. Everyone would pretend to be kind because the owner was watching. Nima stayed silent, because deep down she knew he was right. For the past 3 months, Baraka had secretly traveled across several hotels within his company, disguised as a homeless old man. At first, the board of directors thought grief had broken him. After the death of his wife 2 years earlier, Baraka changed. He stopped attending public events. He withdrew from investors. Even his own children living abroad rarely spoke with him anymore. But the truth was far more complicated. Loneliness had forced him to notice something painful. The empire he spent 40 years building no longer resembled the dream he once believed in. Workers feared managers. Poor people were treated like dirt. Executives cared more about profit than dignity. And the final wound came 6 months earlier when an anonymous letter arrived at Baraka's private office. The letter described abuse inside Bahari Grand Hotel, humiliation, corruption, cruelty toward low-level employees. At the bottom, someone had written one sentence by hand. This hotel has forgotten the people you built it for. Baraka never forgot those words, because he himself came from poverty. He still remembered sleeping hungry beside his mother in a tiny fishing village near Bagamoyo. He remembered selling boiled cassava barefoot beside the roadside as a child. He remembered watching rich tourists enter luxury resorts while guards chased local children away from the gates. And most painfully, he remembered his mother dying outside a private hospital after staff ignored her because she looked poor. That memory never left him, not even after billions of shillings, not even after success, not even after the world began calling him one of Tanzania's greatest businessmen, which was why he sat silently outside his own hotel, now disguised as the kind of man society ignored, because truth revealed itself differently to poor people. Nima closed the financial folder carefully. We already found suspicious transfers connected to manager Jabari Mintemvu, she said quietly. Missing supplier payments, false maintenance expenses. Someone is stealing from the company. Baraka nodded slowly. I expected as much. But there is something else, Nima added. She hesitated briefly before speaking again. Several workers mentioned a waitress named Mwanajuma. Baraka's eyes softened almost immediately. The young woman helping you. Yes. They say Jabari has started targeting her. Baraka stared through the SUV window silently. Outside dawn slowly brightened the city skyline. For the first time in years, guilt touched him unexpectedly, because Mwanajuma did not know the danger surrounding her. She believed she was helping a helpless old man. Instead, she had unknowingly stepped into a hidden war inside one of East Africa's wealthiest companies. Later that afternoon, Bahari Grand Hotel buzzed with tension. Foreign investors were expected within days, and Jabari had transformed into a storm of anger and control. Workers rushed across marble floors carrying flower arrangements, polishing silverware, and arranging expensive decorations. Nobody moved slowly. Nobody smiled naturally. Fear controlled everything. Inside the kitchen, Mwanajuma quietly arranged plates beside another worker named Omari, a dishwasher barely older than Salaam. Omari leaned closer carefully. You should avoid that old man for a while. Mwanajuma kept working. Why? Because Jabari is watching you. She looked down silently. Omari lowered his voice further. He asked security guards questions about you this morning. Fear crawled into her stomach immediately. My mother depends on this job, she whispered. Then be careful. Before Mwanajuma could answer, shouting suddenly erupted near the kitchen entrance. Jabari stormed inside furiously. Who prepared the executive dining table? Several workers froze. A young cleaner raised her hand nervously. The flower arrangement is wrong, Jabari barked. Do you people want investors thinking this place is a village restaurant? The cleaner apologized repeatedly while trembling. Jabari grabbed the flowers violently and threw them onto the floor. Useless. Nobody moved. Nobody defended her, because everyone feared becoming the next target. Jabari turned sharply and noticed Mwanajuma nearby. You, he snapped, come with me. Her heartbeat quickened instantly. Jabari led her toward the rear storage corridor away from guests. The moment they were alone, his expression hardened completely. I warned you already. Mwanajuma lowered her eyes. I understand, sir. No, you do not understand. His voice became colder. Workers are talking. Guests are noticing your behavior. This hotel is not a shelter for beggars. He was hungry. And that is not your problem. His voice echoed through the corridor walls. Mwanajuma flinched slightly. Jabari stepped closer. Do you know why people stay poor? He asked bitterly. Because they waste energy helping useless people instead of helping themselves. Those words struck something painful inside her, because they sounded so cruelly familiar to things society constantly told poor people. Protect yourself first. Ignore suffering. Survival before humanity. But Mwanajuma thought about her mother, about neighbors once sharing medicine when Bi Rehema became sick, about strangers helping bury her father years earlier when they had no money. Poor people survived because someone cared. I don't think kindness is weakness, she said quietly. The corridor became dangerously silent. Jabari stared at her in disbelief. Then anger twisted across his face. You are becoming arrogant. No, sir. Then stop acting like a saint. At that exact moment, movement appeared outside the rear service gate. Baraka stood quietly near the alley entrance, holding the brown blanket Mwanajuma had given him. Jabari noticed immediately. His expression darkened. So he came back again. Before Mwanajuma could react, Jabari stormed outside toward the old man. Didn't I tell you to stay away from this hotel? Baraka remained calm. I was leaving. You people always return when you smell free food. Workers nearby slowed down secretly to watch. Mwanajuma felt panic rising instantly. Sir, please be quiet. Jabari suddenly grabbed the food container Baraka carried and threw it onto the ground. Rice scattered across the dirty pavement. Several kitchen workers gasped softly. Mwanajuma stared in shock. Baraka looked down silently at the ruined food, and for one brief moment pain crossed his face. Not because of hunger, because the humiliation reminded him of his mother kneeling on hospital steps decades earlier after someone threw away food she could not afford. Mwanajuma immediately rushed forward and knelt beside the spilled rice. Without caring about her uniform, without caring about dirt or shame, she began picking up the container with trembling hands. He did nothing wrong, she whispered. Jabari laughed bitterly. Then maybe both of you belong on the streets together. The insult hit harder than he intended, because several workers nearby lowered their eyes in shame. Not shame for Mwanajuma, shame for themselves. Baraka watched her quietly as she struggled to save what remained of the food. And in that painful moment, the old billionaire finally understood something important. The greatest poverty inside Bahari Grand Hotel was not money, it was humanity. The atmosphere inside Bahari Grand Hotel changed completely after the incident behind the service gate. Workers became quieter. Conversation stopped whenever Jabari walked nearby. Even the kitchen staff, who normally joked loudly while preparing meals, now worked in nervous silence. Fear spread fast in places where people depended on small salaries to survive, and Jabari understood fear very well. 3 days remained before the anniversary gala, the most important event of the year for Bahari Grand Hotel. Politicians, foreign investors, celebrities, and tourism executives from across East Africa were expected to attend. Jabari wanted perfection, not humanity, not compassion, perfection. That morning, he stormed through the lobby, criticizing every small detail. The flowers are dying. The silverware still has fingerprints. Who approved this table arrangement? Workers rushed in panic while guests quietly watched the tension unfolding around them. Near the reception desk, Mwanajuma lowered her head and focused on polishing glasses. She avoided looking directly at Jabari, avoided speaking unless necessary, avoided everything that could attract attention. But avoiding trouble had become impossible, because the moment people noticed kindness inside cruel environments, kindness itself became suspicious. You should stay away from that old man, whispered a waitress named Zawadi while arranging napkins beside her. Mwanajuma continued working silently. I mean it, Zawadi added nervously. People are talking. What are they saying? That maybe you know him already, or maybe he's using you somehow. Mwanajuma almost laughed from disbelief. Using her? The old man barely even spoke unless necessary. He's just hungry, she replied quietly. Zawadi shook her head. You trust people too easily. Before Mwanajuma could answer, a loud crash echoed across the restaurant hall. Everyone turned immediately. Omari stood frozen beside the dish station while broken plates scattered across the floor near his feet. Jabari approached instantly. "What happened here?" Omari swallowed nervously. "I slipped while carrying the tray, sir." The manager's face darkened. "Do you know how expensive those plates were?" "I'm sorry." Sorry does not replace property. The entire restaurant became silent. Omari bent down quickly to collect the broken pieces before someone stepped on them, but his hands trembled badly. Mwanajuma understood why. Omari's father had died 6 months earlier. Since then, the young dishwasher supported his two younger sisters alone. One mistake could destroy everything. Jabari looked around deliberately, making sure workers were watching. "This is exactly why poor people remain poor," he announced loudly. "Carelessness, no discipline, no standards." Omari lowered his eyes in humiliation. Mwanajuma felt anger burn inside her chest. Not because of the broken plates, because Jabari enjoyed humiliating people publicly. That was what frightened her most. Cruelty had become entertainment for him. "Clean this mess and your salary will cover the damage," Jabari snapped before walking away. Omari remained frozen beside the shattered plates. After work slowed later that afternoon, Mwanajuma quietly approached him near the washing station. "You okay?" Omari laughed bitterly without looking up. "I just lost almost half my monthly pay. You didn't do it on purpose. That doesn't matter here." The sound of running water filled the silence between them. Finally, Omari lowered his voice carefully. "I saw the old man again this morning." Mwanajuma looked up immediately. "Where? Near the bus station beside the harbor." Relief spread through her chest before she could hide it. For some reason, she had worried constantly since Jabari threw away his food days earlier. "You care about him a lot," Omari observed quietly. Mwanajuma hesitated. "He reminds me of my father." Omari looked surprised. "My father used to sit quietly like that too," she explained softly, "even when life hurt him." For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Omari leaned closer. "Be careful," he whispered. "Jabari is looking for reasons to fire people before the gala." Fear returned immediately. Mwanajuma nodded silently. That evening, heavy traffic crowded the streets outside Bahari Grand Hotel while workers rushed preparing decorations for the anniversary event. Large golden banners hung across the entrance. Fresh flowers arrived from expensive suppliers. Luxury cars pulled in constantly, carrying wealthy guests checking into presidential suites. Meanwhile, just across the street, children sold peanuts barefoot beside moving traffic. The contrast disturbed Baraka more each day. From his quiet seat near the roadside, he watched hotel workers moving like frightened shadows behind the glass walls, especially Mwanajuma. He noticed how exhausted she looked now, how carefully she avoided Jabari, how fear had entered her eyes. And deep inside, guilt continued growing heavier, because all this suffering had started partly because of him. When Mwanajuma finally stepped outside carrying trash bags toward the service area, she nearly jumped after noticing Baraka sitting nearby. "You came back again," she whispered. Baraka smiled faintly. "Perhaps I am stubborn." She glanced nervously toward the hotel entrance. "If Jabari sees you." "He already hates me." Despite herself, Mwanajuma smiled weakly. Then her expression softened. "You look cold." The evening wind blowing from the ocean had grown stronger. Baraka still carried the brown blanket she had given him, folded carefully beside him. "I'm all right," he said. But Mwanajuma noticed him coughing quietly into his hand. "You're not all right." Before he could protest, she disappeared briefly through the service entrance. A few minutes later, she returned carrying a small tray covered with cloth. "Eat quickly," she whispered. Baraka uncovered the tray slowly. Rice, stewed beans, tea, fresh bread, real food. His eyes lifted toward her. "You will get into trouble again." "I know." Then why do this Mwanajuma look genuinely confused by the question? "Because you're hungry." Such a simple answer. No calculation, no expectation, no hidden motive, just humanity. Baraka slowly accepted the tea. For a moment, neither spoke while traffic lights reflected across the darkening streets around them. Then suddenly footsteps approached fast behind Mwanajuma. "Jabari." His expression turned murderous the moment he saw the tray. "What did I tell you?" Mwanajuma stood instantly. "Sir, please." Before she could finish speaking, Jabari struck the tray violently from her hands. The metal crashed loudly against the pavement. Tea spilled across the ground. Rice scattered beside Baraka's feet. Several nearby drivers and workers turned toward the noise immediately. Mwanajuma stared down in shock. Jabari pointed furiously at the mess. "You feed street beggars using hotel property while guests are spending thousands inside. It was kitchen leftovers." "I don't care." Baraka slowly stood. "She was only helping me. Nobody asked you to speak." Jabari shoved him backward roughly. Mwanajuma gasped immediately. "Stop!" The word escaped before she could control herself. Everything became silent. Jabari turned slowly toward her. Even the guards near the entrance looked nervous now, because nobody spoke to Jabari that way. Mwanajuma's breathing became shaky, but anger pushed her fear aside. "He's an old man," she said quietly. "Why do you hate him so much?" For one dangerous second, Jabari looked ready to slap her. Instead, he smiled coldly. "You want to defend beggars?" he asked. "Fine." Then in front of hotel workers, security guards, and passing guests, Jabari grabbed Mwanajuma's waitress tray and threw it directly into a dirty puddle beside the road. "You can clean garbage with garbage," he said cruelly. Humiliation crashed over her instantly, her eyes filled with tears. Nobody moved, nobody defended her. Only Baraka stepped forward slightly, his expression unreadable. And while Mwanajuma stood trembling beneath the hotel lights, the hidden billionaire finally made a silent decision. Jabari Matemvu's cruelty would not continue much longer. Mwanajuma cried quietly the entire journey home that night. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just silent tears sliding down her face while the crowded Daladala bus rattled through the dark streets of Dar es Salaam. Nobody noticed. Nobody asked questions. Inside public buses, people carried too many private pains to pay attention to another stranger's suffering. She kept replaying the humiliation in her mind, the tray crashing into the puddle, the laughter from nearby drivers, the way Jabari looked at her as though kindness itself was stupidity. By the time Mwanajuma reached Tandal, exhaustion had settled deep into her bones. Their small house was dark, except for a weak kerosene lamp glowing beside Bi Rehema's mattress. Salaam sat awake, waiting for her. "You're late again," he whispered. Mwanajuma forced a smile. There was extra work, but Salaam immediately noticed her swollen eyes. "What happened?" "Nothing. You were crying." Before she could answer, Bi Rehema began coughing violently from the corner mattress. Mwanajuma rushed toward her mother instantly. The coughing sounded worse tonight, deeper, painful. Bi Rehema struggled to breathe properly before finally settling back weakly against the pillow. "We need to take you back to the clinic," Mwanajuma whispered. Her mother shook her head slowly. "With what money?" The question stabbed straight through her heart. Mwanajuma looked away silently, because there was no answer. The clinic already demanded payment before continuing treatment. Salem's school exam fees remained unpaid. Rent was overdue again. And now she risked losing her job entirely. That night, after everyone slept, Mwanajuma sat alone outside the house, beneath the warm night sky. The neighborhood remained noisy even after midnight. Music, arguments, babies crying, generators humming, life refusing to rest. She hugged her knees quietly while staring at distant city lights far beyond Tandale. Somewhere beyond those lights stood Bahari Grand Hotel, glowing beautifully beside the ocean. A place filled with people who spent more money on one dinner than her family needed for an entire month. Sometimes she wondered if rich people even understood how ordinary people survived, or if poverty simply became invisible after enough money. The next morning, Mwanajuma almost did not go to work. Fear followed her every step while entering the hotel. She expected immediate dismissal, expected security guards waiting, expected humiliation. Instead, nobody spoke to her at first. Workers avoided eye contact nervously while preparing breakfast service. Rumors clearly spread overnight. Near the kitchen entrance, Omari approached carefully. "You're lucky," he whispered. "Why Jabari wanted to fire you yesterday?" Mwanajuma's stomach tightened immediately. What stopped him? Omari glanced around nervously before lowering his voice. "Corporate executives are arriving soon. They need full staff." Relief washed through her briefly, then disappeared just as fast. Temporary survival was still survival balanced on a knife's edge. Throughout the morning, Jabari ignored her completely. Oddly, that frightened her more than shouting, because silence from cruel people usually meant something worse was coming. Around lunchtime, Mwanajuma carried clean towels toward the executive floor when she noticed Baraka sitting near the public gardens across the street. Relief unexpectedly softened her chest. He looked better today. Cleaner somehow. Stronger. The brown blanket remained folded carefully beside him. As she passed the side gate later, she quietly slipped outside carrying a small bottle of water. "You should not keep returning here," she told him softly. Baraka smiled faintly. "And yet you keep coming outside to see me." Mwanajuma sat carefully beside the low concrete wall. For several moments, neither spoke. The city moved endlessly around them. Cars honked, street vendors shouted, palm trees swayed gently near the ocean road. Finally, Baraka spoke quietly. "Why are you sad today?" She laughed softly without humor. "Is it that obvious?" "To old people, yes." Mwanajuma stared down at her hands. "My mother is sick. My brother may miss his exams because we cannot pay school fees. And my manager thinks poor people deserve humiliation." Baraka listened silently. "I used to believe hard work changed everything," she continued quietly. "But sometimes it feels like no matter how hard people struggle, life still crushes them." Baraka's expression grew thoughtful. "When I was young," he said slowly, "I believed money solved suffering." Mwanajuma looked surprised. "You don't sound like a beggar when you talk." That almost made him smile. "And how should beggars sound?" She looked embarrassed immediately. "I didn't mean—" "No," he interrupted gently. "You meant honest curiosity." He looked toward the hotel across the road. "The truth is, rich people also suffer." Mwanajuma frowned slightly. "With respect, Baba Baraka, suffering is easier inside big houses." For the first time in days, genuine amusement flickered across his face. "You may be right." Then his expression slowly darkened again. "But wealth creates another danger." What danger? Baraka became quiet for several seconds before answering. "One day you wake up and realize people no longer see your humanity. They only see your power." Mwanajuma thought carefully about those words. "I think poor people understand that too," she whispered eventually. Baraka looked at her with surprise. "People stop seeing us," she explained softly. "They only see problems." The old billionaire felt something painful move inside his chest. Because she was right. Different worlds, different suffering, yet somehow loneliness still existed inside both. Suddenly, Jabari's voice exploded from behind them. "So this is where you disappear during work hours." Mwanajuma jumped to her feet instantly. Jabari approached with two supervisors behind him. His expression was full of disgust. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "Sitting on the roadside with beggars while guests are waiting inside." "I came for only 1 minute," Mwanajuma said quickly. 1 minute too long." Baraka slowly stood. "She was giving me water." Jabari pointed aggressively toward him. "You stay away from my staff." She chose kindness herself. That answer only made Jabari angrier. "Kindness," he snapped. "You parasites survive by manipulating soft-hearted fools." Mwanajuma flinched, but Baraka's expression changed slightly. Not anger. Disappointment. Deep disappointment. Jabari noticed the look immediately. What he demanded. "You think staring at me changes reality?" Baraka studied him quietly before speaking. One day he said calmly, "You may need kindness from someone poorer than yourself." Jabari laughed harshly. "That day will never come." The certainty in his voice disturbed Mwanajuma. Because people who believed themselves untouchable often became dangerous. Jabari turned back toward her. "Return inside immediately." Mwanajuma nodded quickly, but before leaving, she glanced once more toward Baraka. Something about him felt different today. More observant, more thoughtful, as though he carried invisible weight far beyond homelessness. That evening, while workers prepared conference rooms upstairs, Baraka sat alone near the harbor, watching the ocean darken beneath sunset. A black SUV quietly stopped nearby. Nima stepped out holding several documents. "We traced more stolen funds," she said softly. "The numbers are worse than expected." Baraka barely looked at the papers. Instead, his thoughts remained fixed on Mwanajuma's words earlier. People stop seeing us. They only see problems. After a long silence, he finally spoke. She still believes goodness matters. Nima followed his gaze toward the distant hotel skyline. In places like that, she said quietly, people like her usually suffer first. Baraka's expression hardened slightly. Not this time. For the first time since beginning his undercover investigation, his patience was beginning to disappear. And somewhere deep inside Bahari, Grand Hotel, Jabari Matemvu had no idea the quiet, homeless old man he mocked daily was already preparing to destroy everything he built through cruelty. The closer the anniversary gala approached, the more Bahari Grand Hotel began to resemble a palace preparing for royalty. Fresh flowers arrived every morning from expensive gardens outside the city. Workers polished marble floors until they reflected the chandeliers above like mirrors. Imported seafood filled refrigerated kitchens while musicians rehearsed near the ballroom stage late into the night. Everything had to look perfect, especially to Jabari Matemvu. For days, he barely slept. Pressure from executives, investors, and government officials had transformed his natural cruelty into constant rage. Every small mistake became a personal insult to him. One waiter received suspension for serving sparkling water in the wrong glass. A cleaner was screamed at for leaving fingerprints on an elevator button. Even the security guards no longer relaxed near the entrance. Fear poisoned the entire building. And in the middle of that pressure stood Mwanajuma, moving silently between tables like someone trying desperately not to be noticed. But Jabari noticed her constantly. Every act, every movement, every glance outside toward the street, especially whenever Baraka appeared nearby. That afternoon, while workers prepared the grand ballroom upstairs, Jabari gathered all staff members inside the conference hall for emergency instructions. Nearly 60 workers stood crowded together beneath bright ceiling lights while air conditioners hummed overhead. Jabari paced slowly at the front of the room. "Listen carefully," he announced sharply. "The guests arriving tomorrow include politicians, foreign investors, and international media." Nobody spoke. "I will not allow embarrassment." His eyes swept across the workers. "Beginning tonight, no homeless people, street vendors, beggars, or dirty children are permitted anywhere near hotel property." Several security guards nodded immediately. "If I see anyone feeding them, speaking to them, or encouraging them to stay nearby," Jabari paused deliberately, "that employee will be removed immediately." Mwanajuma felt tension tighten inside her stomach, because everyone knew who he meant. Jabari looked directly at her. Some people here confuse kindness with stupidity. The room became painfully silent. Mwanajuma lowered her eyes while shame burned across her face. But deep down, something else had begun growing quietly beneath her fear. Anger. Not loud anger. Not reckless anger. Just the painful realization that cruelty often survived because good people stayed silent too long. After the meeting ended, workers slowly returned to their duties, whispering nervously among themselves. Omari approached Mwanajuma near the laundry corridor. "He's trying to scare you. He already has." Omari hesitated briefly before speaking again. "My aunt works near the harbor," he whispered carefully. "She saw security guards paying street boys this morning." Mwanajuma frowned. "For what?" "To chase homeless people away from the hotel area before the gala." Her chest tightened immediately. Even Baba Baraka Omari nodded slowly. Fear spread through her instantly. That evening, dark clouds gathered above the city, while heavy traffic crowded the streets surrounding Bahari Grand Hotel. Wealthy guests arrived continuously, while photographers prepared outside for tomorrow's celebration. Across the road, Baraka sat quietly beneath a palm tree watching the hotel lights flicker against the evening sky. Two young street boys suddenly approached him nervously. "You should leave this area tonight," Mziwan warned quietly. Baraka looked up calmly. "Why?" "The hotel guards are angry. They said they'll beat anyone sleeping nearby." The boys hurried away before saying more. Baraka remained seated silently. Inside the hotel, Mwanajuma struggled to concentrate on work. Every time she passed the front windows, she searched for Baraka outside. Still there, still alone, still vulnerable. Finally, near closing time, she could no longer ignore the fear inside her chest. She quietly wrapped bread, tea, and fruit inside a paper bag before slipping toward the rear employee exit. The night air outside smelled of ocean wind and car smoke. She crossed the street quickly toward Baraka. You must leave tonight, she whispered urgently. Baraka studied her expression carefully. What happened? They're planning something. Before he could answer, loud shouting suddenly erupted near the hotel entrance. 3 security guards stormed across the street aggressively. There he is. Mwanajuma's blood froze. One guard pointed directly at Baraka. We warned you already. Baraka slowly stood while holding the paper bag she brought him. I am leaving peacefully. But Jabari appeared behind the guards almost immediately. His expensive suit jacket moved sharply in the wind as he crossed the street with furious eyes. I'm finished being patient, he snapped. Passing drivers slowed down curiously. Several hotel workers secretly watched through the glass entrance. Mwanajuma stepped protectively closer to Baraka. Please stop this, she begged. Jabari ignored her completely. You people ruin everything, he spat toward Baraka. Guests spend thousands to stay here while filthy beggars sleep outside the entrance like animals. Baraka remained calm. Poverty is not filth. Jabari laughed coldly. That's easy to say when you survive by begging. Then without warning, one security guard grabbed Baraka roughly by the arm. Mwanajuma gasped. Don't touch him like that. Stay out of this, another guard warned. But Mwanajuma moved forward anyway. He's old. Jabari's patience finally snapped. Remove him now. The guards obeyed immediately. One shoved Baraka hard while another grabbed the blanket Mwanajuma had given him and threw it onto the dirty roadside. Traffic slowed further. People began staring openly now. Mwanajuma rushed toward the fallen blanket while Baraka struggled to keep balance. Please, she cried. He did nothing wrong. But Jabari no longer cared who watched. Drag him away from here. The guards pulled Baraka toward the roadside violently. One nearly knocked him onto the pavement. For the first time since meeting him, Mwanajuma saw real pain cross the old man's face. Not physical pain, something deeper. Humiliation. Memory. Wounds older than the streets themselves. And suddenly, without thinking, Mwanajuma grabbed one guard's arm. Enough. Everyone froze. Even traffic noise seemed distant for one impossible second. The guard stared at her in shock. Jabari looked furious. You touch my staff again, Mwanajuma said breathlessly. And everyone here will see what kind of people run this hotel. Fear exploded inside her immediately after the words escaped, because she knew exactly what she had just done. She challenged him publicly. Jabari stepped slowly toward her. His voice became dangerously quiet. You think guests care about a waitress defending beggars? No, she whispered shakily. But maybe God cares. The silence afterward felt enormous. Several hotel workers watching through the glass looked terrified. One guard released Baraka uncertainly, and for the first time Jabari realized something unexpected. Fear no longer completely controlled Mwanajuma. That frightened him more than rebellion itself. His jaw tightened angrily. Get back inside before I fire you tonight. Mwanajuma slowly bent down and picked up Baraka's blanket from the roadside dust. Then she handed it back to him carefully. Their eyes met briefly. Baraka said nothing. But the look inside his eyes carried something powerful. Not pity, not helplessness. Recognition. As though he had finally seen exactly who she truly was. Jabari pointed furiously toward the hotel entrance. Now. Mwanajuma turned slowly and walked back toward the glowing hotel lights, while hundreds of thoughts crashed inside her mind. Behind her, the guards reluctantly stepped away from Baraka. But hidden beneath the darkness across the street, another pair of eyes had witnessed everything. Nima Kweka sat inside a parked SUV, recording the entire incident silently on her phone. And beside her, Mzee Baraka Mwini watched Bahari Grand Hotel with an expression colder than the ocean wind. Because the time for observing cruelty was almost over, the city felt colder after what happened outside Bahari Grand Hotel. Not because the weather changed, but because something inside Mwanajuma had shifted permanently. For the first time in her life, she openly stood against someone powerful, and now fear followed her everywhere. The next morning, Jabari did not yell at her. He did not insult her. He barely even looked at her. That silence frightened her more than anger ever could. Workers whispered nervously whenever she passed through the corridors. Some admired her quietly for defending Baraka. Others avoided her, completely afraid Jabari might punish anyone connected to her. Only Omari still spoke normally. "You should be careful today," he warned softly while stacking clean dishes in the kitchen. Mwanajuma nodded. "I know." He spent almost an hour inside his office this morning talking to executives. Her stomach tightened immediately. "About me? I don't know." But they both knew. By midday, the hotel had transformed into complete chaos preparing for the gala. Delivery trucks arrived non-stop. Florists decorated the ballroom stage. Foreign journalists tested cameras near the entrance while politicians' assistants rushed through the lobby, carrying schedules and security lists. Luxury filled every corner of the building. Yet Mwanajuma could think about only one thing: Baraka. She had not seen him all morning. Normally he sat quietly somewhere across the street before sunrise. Today nothing. No blanket, no small cloth bag, no calm eyes watching the hotel from a distance. Just emptiness. By afternoon, worry had begun eating at her concentration. She accidentally placed the wrong wine glasses at one executive table and nearly dropped a tray while serving coffee. Jabari noticed immediately. "You're distracted again," he said coldly. "I'm sorry, sir." "You should be." His voice lowered dangerously. People with problems are easy to replace. The word stayed with her the rest of the day. People with problems, as though poor families' sickness, hunger, and fear were personal failures instead of burdens life forced onto ordinary people. After sunset, the gala rehearsal finally ended. Exhausted workers slowly cleaned the ballroom while musicians packed equipment near the stage. Mwanajuma looked outside again. Still no sign of Baraka. Fear pressed harder against her chest now. What if the guards heard him after she left? What if he became sick somewhere alone? What if... Before she could finish the thought, Omari approached carrying trash bags. "I asked one of the street boys near the harbor," he whispered carefully. "They said an old homeless man collapsed near the Dala Dala station last night." Mwanajuma froze instantly. "Where?" "Near the abandoned bus stop close to Kariakou Market." Without thinking further, she grabbed her small bag immediately. Mwanajuma. But she was already moving. Night traffic flooded the streets of Dar es Salaam while neon lights reflected across wet pavement from a brief evening drizzle earlier. Vendors still crowded the roadsides, selling grilled maize, roasted meat, and tea to exhausted workers heading home. Mwanajuma pushed through crowds anxiously. Her feet hurt, her body ached, but fear gave her strength. The closer she moved toward Kariakou Market, the rougher the streets became. Luxury hotels disappeared behind crowded stalls, broken sidewalks, and sleeping children wrapped in thin cloth beside closed shops. Finally, near an abandoned Dala shelter covered in old posters and graffiti, she saw him. Baraka sat leaning weakly against a cracked concrete wall. His breathing looked shallow. The brown blanket covered his shoulders, but even from a distance, Mwanajuma could see him trembling. "Baba Baraka." He slowly opened his eyes. For one brief moment, genuine surprise crossed his face. "You came." Mwanajuma knelt beside him immediately. "You're sick. It's nothing." But his voice sounded weaker than before. She touched his forehead lightly. Burning. Fear gripped her chest. "You have fever," Baraka tried, smiling faintly. "Old age is stubborn." "No," she whispered firmly. "This is serious." The market around them slowly quieted as night deepened. Most shops had already closed. Only a few food sellers remained beneath weak lantern light, while distant music echoed across the crowded streets. Mwanajuma looked around desperately. Then she remembered the small envelope hidden inside her bag. Money. Almost all the savings she carried for her mother's clinic payment tomorrow. Her fingers tightened around it painfully. For several seconds, she said nothing. Inside her mind, fear and guilt battled each other. Birahema needed medicine. The clinic already threatened stopping treatment. Salaam still needed exam fees. And now Baraka sat shivering alone beside a broken bus stop. Mwanajuma closed her eyes briefly, then made her choice. "Wait here," she whispered. Baraka watched silently as she disappeared into the night. Nearly 40 minutes later, she returned carrying medicine bread, hot tea, and fruit inside plastic bags. She also carried a small basin of warm water borrowed from a nearby tea cellar. Baraka stared at everything in disbelief. You should not spend money on me. Mwanajuma ignored the protest completely. Drink this first. She helped him sit properly before handing him medicine with water. Baraka studied her carefully while swallowing the tablets. You used your own money. It's okay. No, he replied quietly. It is not okay. For the first time since meeting her, emotion cracked openly through his calm voice. People like you cannot afford generosity. Mwanajuma lowered her eyes. Maybe not, she whispered. But if poor people stop helping each other, who will? Those words hit Baraka harder than any accusation ever could. Because sitting there beneath the dirty bus shelter, he suddenly remembered another woman speaking almost the same words decades earlier. His mother. She used to feed hungry fishermen even when they themselves barely had food. Kindness keeps poor people alive, she often said. Baraka looked away quickly toward the dark street. But it was too late. Mwanajuma already saw tears gathering inside his eyes. The old billionaire cleared his throat roughly. Nobody has cared for me like this in a very long time. Something about the sadness in his voice broke her heart completely. She gently adjusted the blanket around his shoulders. You remind me of my father, she admitted softly. Baraka looked at her again. He also suffered quietly. She continued, even when life treated him unfairly. Silence settled between them. Warm, painful, human. Around midnight, traffic noises faded slowly across the market streets while the city finally began sleeping. Baraka finished the tea quietly. Then he looked at Mwanajuma with an expression she did not fully understand. Why are you still kind? He asked softly, after the world keeps humiliating you. The question lingered heavily between them. Mwanajuma thought for a long moment before answering. Because if cruelty changes me too, she whispered, then poverty has truly won. Baraka lowered his eyes immediately. And for the first time since beginning his secret investigation, the billionaire owner of Bahari Grand Hotel felt ashamed. Ashamed that a struggling waitress carrying the weight of an entire family still possessed more humanity than many powerful people surrounding him every day. Hidden nearby in the darkness, a black SUV quietly watched the bus station from a distance. Inside, Nima Kweka sat silently observing everything through the windshield, and beside her, tears slowly filled Mzee Baraka Mwinyi's eyes as he realized one painful truth. The poorest person in this city might also be the richest in heart. By the next morning, exhaustion hung over Mwanajuma like a heavy shadow. She had slept barely 2 hours after returning from Kariakou Market. Most of the night she stayed awake listening to Bi Rahema's painful coughing, while silently wondering whether she had made the wrong decision spending their clinic money on Baraka. Guilt refused to leave her, but so did the memory of the old man shivering alone beneath the abandoned bus shelter. As sunrise slowly brightened, Tandal Salaam prepared for school, quietly beside the small charcoal stove. Mama's fever got worse again, he whispered. Mwanajuma immediately crossed the room toward her mother. Bi Rahema's breathing sounded rough, weak, dangerously weak. We should go to the clinic today, Mwanajuma said softly. Her mother opened tired eyes slowly. With what money? The question struck again like a knife. Mwanajuma looked away. There was no clinic money anymore, only silence. Salaam studied his sister carefully. You used it for the old man, didn't you? Mwanajuma froze briefly, then nodded. The boy lowered his eyes toward the floor. For a moment she feared anger, but instead Salaam sighed quietly. Baba would have done the same thing. Tears burned instantly behind Mwanajuma's eyes. Their father had been dead 4 years now, yet his kindness still lived inside the family like an invisible inheritance. Even poverty had not destroyed it completely. When Mwanajuma finally arrived at Bahari Grand Hotel later that morning, tension filled the building immediately. Luxury vehicles crowded the entrance. Security guards checked guest lists constantly. Foreign journalists moved through the lobby, carrying cameras and microphones, while hotel executives rushed between meetings upstairs. The gala would begin tomorrow night, and the pressure inside the hotel had become unbearable. Workers moved quickly with lowered eyes, terrified of making mistakes. especially after rumors spread that company auditors had secretly arrived in Dar es Salaam. Near the staff corridor, Omari approached Mwanajuma carefully. You heard what they say. Money disappeared from the hotel accounts. Mwanajuma frowned slightly. What kind of money, I don't know exactly. But accounting staff were questioned this morning. Before she could answer, a sharp voice interrupted them. Why are you standing around talking Jabari? His expression looked darker than usual. Tired, agitated, dangerous. We're returning to work, Sir Omari answered quickly. Jabari's eyes landed on Mwanajuma. For several long seconds, he simply stared at her silently. Then he smiled. The smile frightened her immediately. Come to my office after lunch, he said calmly. Fear tightened inside her chest. Yes, sir. The rest of the morning passed painfully slowly. Mwanajuma struggled to focus while serving guests. Her mind kept racing between her mother's condition, Baraka's illness, and Jabari's strange behavior. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. At exactly 2 o'clock, she stood nervously outside Jabari's office near the executive floor. Her hands trembled slightly before knocking. Enter. The office smelled of expensive cologne and polished wood. Large windows overlooked the ocean, while framed business awards decorated the walls behind Jabari's desk. He did not invite her to sit. Instead, he opened a folder slowly. Mwanajuma. He began quietly. Do you know why businesses fail? She swallowed nervously. No, sir. Because weak people create weak environments. He slid several printed documents across the desk toward her. She looked down in confusion. Inventory reports, missing wine bottles, cash discrepancies, supplier receipts. I don't understand, she whispered. Jabari leaned back calmly. These losses occurred during your work shifts. Her blood turned cold instantly. No. You had access to storage rooms. No, sir. You were also seen leaving with food repeatedly. That was leftover food. To steal once, Jabari interrupted, coldly makes stealing again easier. Mwanajuma stared at him in disbelief. You think I stole money? I think poor people become desperate. Tears filled her eyes immediately. No, she whispered shakily. I would never, Jabari suddenly slammed his hand against the desk. Do not lie to me. She flinched hard. Outside the office window, ocean waves crashed softly against distant shores while luxury continued flowing through the hotel below. But inside that room, Mwanajuma felt completely powerless. You embarrassed management publicly? Jabari continued quietly. You defend beggars instead of respecting authority, and now inventory disappears. I didn't steal anything. Can you prove it? The question crushed her instantly, because poor people rarely had proof. Only accusations. Jabari stood slowly and walked toward the window. For your sake, he said calmly, I suggest you admit the truth before corporate investigators arrive. Mwanajuma shook her head desperately. There is no truth to admit. For a long moment, Jabari remained silent. Then he turned back toward her with cold eyes. Very well. That evening, shortly before dinner service, all hotel staff were suddenly ordered into the ballroom. Confused whispers filled the room while workers gathered beneath the massive chandeliers and golden decorations prepared for tomorrow's gala. Mwanajuma's heart pounded violently. Something terrible was happening. Jabari stood near the stage beside 2 corporate supervisors. His expression remained perfectly controlled now. Professional. Cold. Unfortunately, he announced loudly, we are dealing with internal theft inside Bahari Grand Hotel. Shock spread across the workers immediately. Several employees exchanged nervous glances. Jabari continued speaking. Food inventory, alcohol supplies, and small cash amounts have disappeared repeatedly over the past month. Mwanajuma felt dizzy. Then Jabari spoke her name. We have identified the primary suspect. The entire ballroom turned toward her instantly. Humiliation exploded through her body. No, she whispered. Jabari held up printed reports dramatically. Multiple staff members witnessed unauthorized food removal. Missing inventory aligns with her work shifts. That's not true, Mwanajuma cried. But fear already controlled the room. Nobody spoke. Nobody defended her. Because everyone understood the danger of opposing management publicly. Omari looked devastated but stayed silent. Jabari stepped closer toward Mwanajuma. Until investigation concludes, he announced coldly, "You are suspended immediately." The words shattered something inside her. Gasps echoed quietly around the ballroom. Mwanajuma stared around the room desperately, at the workers avoiding eye contact, at the supervisors already judging her, at the luxury decorations glowing beautifully above her humiliation. And suddenly she understood something painful. In places ruled by fear, truth became weak, especially when spoken by poor people. "I didn't steal," she whispered again, but her voice sounded small now, broken. Jabari handed paperwork toward security. "Escort her out." Two guards approached carefully, not aggressively, almost apologetically, which somehow hurt even more. Tears rolled silently down Mwanajuma's face as she removed her name tag slowly from the uniform she worked so hard to protect. The ballroom blurred around her. Everything she feared had finally happened. No salary, no medicine for Birahima, no school fees for Salaam. Nothing. As the guards led her toward the exit, she glanced once through the massive glass doors toward the darkening city outside. And there, across the street beneath the fading evening light, stood Baraka, watching everything, his expression unreadable. But his eyes carried a storm powerful enough to destroy empires. Mwanajuma walked home that night like someone carrying invisible stones inside her chest. The city lights of Dar es Salaam blurred through tears she could no longer stop hiding. Crowded buses roared past her, street vendors shouted prices into the humid night air, music echoed from bars near the roadside. Life continued normally around her, but her own world had collapsed, suspended, accused of theft, humiliated in front of everyone. And worst of all, she had no way to explain the truth to her family without breaking them completely. When she finally reached the small house in Tandil, Salaam immediately stood up from beside the charcoal stove. "You're late again." Then he saw her face. Fear entered his eyes instantly. "What happened?" Mwanajuma tried speaking calmly, but the moment she opened her mouth, tears escaped again. Salem's expression changed completely. "They fired you." "Not yet," she whispered shakily. "Suspended." Birahima slowly pushed herself upright from the mattress. For what Mwanajuma looked down at the floor. "They accused me of stealing." Silence crashed through the tiny room. Even the outside neighborhood noises suddenly felt distant. Salaam stared at her in disbelief. "But you didn't—" "I know." Birahima closed her eyes painfully, not because she doubted her daughter, because poor people understood something cruel about the world. Truth alone was rarely enough, especially against powerful people. "They wanted someone weak to blame," Mwanajuma whispered. "And I was easy." Salaam stood up angrily. "That manager hates you because of the old man." "Lower your voice," Birahima warned softly before coughing hard again. Mwanajuma immediately rushed to support her mother. The coughing sounded worse than ever now, sharp, painful, almost violent. Fear gripped Mwanajuma instantly. "Mama, we need the clinic tonight." But Birahima shook her head weakly. "No money." Those two words had become prison walls around their lives. No medicine, no justice, no safety, no escape. Later that night, while Salaam slept beside his books, Mwanajuma sat awake near the doorway, staring into darkness. Hopelessness wrapped around her like cold water. Tomorrow was the gala, the biggest event in the hotel's history. And meanwhile, she sat jobless inside a crumbling house with a sick mother growing weaker by the hour. For the first time in many years, anger toward God entered her heart. Not loud anger, just tired disappointment. Why did kindness always seem to cost poor people more? Why did cruel people sleep peacefully while good people suffered endlessly? And why did helping one old man feel like destroying her entire family? A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "You regret helping him." Mwanajuma looked up immediately. Birahima stood weakly near the doorway, wrapped in a thin blanket. "No," Mwanajuma answered quietly after a long pause. "I regret living in a world where kindness feels dangerous." Her mother slowly sat beside her. "When your father was alive," Birahima whispered, "people called him foolish too." Mwanajuma lowered her eyes. "Because he helped everyone." "Yes." Her mother smiled faintly. and when he died, half this neighborhood came to bury him. Silence settled between them. The cruel collect money, Birahema continued softly, but the kind collect people. Tears filled Mwanajuma's eyes again, because despite sickness and poverty, her mother still spoke with dignity, richer than most wealthy people. The next morning, Bahari Grand Hotel exploded with activity. Luxury SUVs lined the entrance. Politicians' security teams inspected hallways while photographers arranged cameras near the ballroom staircase. Imported flowers filled the lobby with perfume, strong enough to cover even the smell of stress hanging beneath the glamour. Inside his office, Jabari adjusted his expensive suit while staring proudly at the preparations below. Everything looked perfect, exactly how he wanted. The troublesome waitress was gone. The beggar disappeared. Corporate executives praised the gala arrangements. Soon investors would arrive. Soon promotions would come. Soon he would finally become untouchable inside the company. But beneath his confidence, something darker quietly lived. Fear. Because hidden inside his locked office drawer sat documents no auditor could ever discover safely. False invoices, secret bank transfers, stolen supplier payments. For 2 years, Jabari quietly drained money from hotel accounts while blaming operational losses on lower workers. And now rumors about internal investigations were spreading too quickly. A sharp knock interrupted his thoughts. One executive assistant entered nervously. "Sir?" "Several luxury vehicles just arrived unexpectedly." Jabari frowned. "The VIP guests?" "No, sir." The assistant swallowed hard. "Corporate vehicles from headquarters." A strange chill moved through Jabari's stomach immediately. How many 5? Something felt wrong. Very wrong. Meanwhile, across the city, Mwanajuma stood in a crowded pharmacy, begging quietly for cheaper medicine alternatives for Birahema. "I'll pay the rest later," she pleaded softly. The pharmacist shook his head apologetically. "I'm sorry." Mwanajuma lowered her eyes. Humiliation had become exhausting now. Everywhere she went, poverty forced explanations, excuses, begging. As she stepped back outside into the heat, her phone suddenly vibrated. "Omari," she answered quickly. "Mwanajuma." "What happened?" His voice sounded panicked. "Something strange is happening here." Fear tightened inside her instantly. "What do you mean corporate executives are everywhere?" "Security changed shifts suddenly, and—" He hesitated. Jabari looks terrified. For several seconds, Mwanajuma said nothing. Then slowly another realization struck her. "Have you seen Baraka?" "No." Her heart sank immediately. 3 days. No sign of him since the suspension. No sign since he watched silently from across the street. Fear returned stronger than before. What if he became worse again? What if suddenly loud engines interrupted Omari's voice through the phone? "What's happening?" Mwanajuma asked quickly. "I don't know," Omari whispered. Then his voice dropped lower. "Oh God, what, Mwanajuma? There are more vehicles arriving." Inside Bahari Grand Hotel, workers stopped moving as a convoy of black luxury SUVs slowly entered the main driveway. The vehicles were unlike anything ordinary executives used. Dark windows, government-level security, private guards wearing earpieces. Even senior managers near reception straightened nervously. Jabari stepped into the lobby trying to remain calm, but his heartbeat had already become unstable, because suddenly he recognized one of the men exiting the lead vehicle. Abdul Karim, Chief Operations Director for the entire Mwini Hospitality Group, a man who never visited hotels personally unless something serious was happening, very serious. Abdul entered the lobby without smiling. Several executives followed behind him carrying folders and tablets. Manager Jabari Abdul said calmly. Jabari forced confidence into his voice. "Sir, welcome to Bahari Grand Hotel." Abdul looked around slowly. Beautiful chandeliers, luxury decorations, perfectly polished marble floors. Then his expression hardened slightly. "Prepare the executive conference room immediately." Jabari nodded quickly. "Of course." But before turning away, Abdul added one sentence quietly enough that only Jabari could hear. "And nobody leaves the building without authorization." Cold fear rushed through Jabari's entire body. because in that moment he finally understood something terrifying. This was no ordinary inspection. Someone powerful had been watching Bahari Grand Hotel for a very long time. And somewhere beyond the city traffic hidden from everyone's eyes, Mzee Baraka Mwinyi was finally preparing to reveal himself. The atmosphere inside Bahari Grand Hotel changed completely within 1 hour. Workers no longer rushed with ordinary fear. Now they moved with confusion, panic, uncertainty. Corporate executives occupied private conference rooms upstairs while security guards quietly blocked certain hallways from public access. Phones rang constantly behind reception desks. Managers whispered nervously near elevators. Something powerful was happening behind the scenes, and nobody understood what. Especially Jabari Mtemvu. Inside his office, sweat gathered beneath his expensive collar despite the cold air conditioning. He tried calling several contacts. No answers. Tried speaking privately with Abdul Karim. Refused. Even senior executives who once treated him confidently now avoided direct conversation. Fear slowly crawled deeper into his chest. Meanwhile, across the city, Mwanajuma sat beside Bi Rahema's mattress, listening helplessly to her mother struggle through another coughing fit. The small house felt painfully quiet. No medicine, almost no food left, and still no work. Salaam sat silently near the doorway, pretending to study while secretly watching his sister's exhausted face. "You should rest," he whispered eventually. Mwanajuma shook her head. "I can't." Her phone suddenly vibrated in her lap. Unknown number. For a moment she hesitated before answering carefully. "Hello, Mwanajuma." Her breath caught instantly. "Baraka." Relief flooded through her so suddenly it almost hurt. "Baba Baraka." "Where are you?" "Are you all right? I am fine." Something about his voice sounded different, stronger, calmer, almost formal. "I need you to come somewhere," he continued quietly. She frowned slightly. "Where Bahari Grand Hotel?" Mwanajuma froze. Her stomach tightened immediately. "I can't go back there." "You must." Fear returned instantly. "Jabari already suspended me." "Please," Baraka said softly. "Trust me." Silence stretched between them. Finally she whispered, "Why?" There was a long pause before he answered. "Because the truth cannot stay hidden anymore." 1 hour later, Mwanajuma stood nervously outside Bahari Grand Hotel once again. The sight alone reopened fresh humiliation inside her chest. Luxury vehicles still lined the entrance. Cameras flashed near the ballroom. Wealthy guests walked confidently beneath golden lights without realizing the storm building quietly inside the hotel walls. Mwanajuma lowered her eyes immediately, hoping workers would not notice her. But something strange happened. Nobody stopped her. In fact, security guards near the entrance stepped aside silently as if expecting her arrival. Confusion spread through her instantly. Inside the lobby, the tension felt unbearable. Managers whispered urgently. Staff members stared nervously toward the executive elevators. And near the center of the marble floor stood Omari. The moment he saw Mwanajuma, he rushed toward her. "You came." "What is happening?" Omari looked overwhelmed. "I don't even know anymore." Before he could explain further, the large executive elevator doors suddenly opened. Every conversation inside the lobby stopped immediately. Several senior company directors stepped out first. Then Abdul Karim appeared. And behind him, Mwanajuma stopped breathing. Baraka walked slowly into the lobby, wearing a perfectly tailored black suit. The transformation felt unreal. Gone were the torn sandals. Gone were the dusty clothes and tired blanket. Now he carried himself with calm authority, powerful enough to silence the entire building without speaking a single word. Security guards straightened instantly. Executives lowered their heads respectfully. Even Abdul stepped aside for him. Mwanajuma stared in complete shock. Her mind refused to understand what her eyes were seeing. Baraka's gaze slowly found hers across the lobby. Gentle, heavy with emotion, but unmistakably powerful. Then something even more unbelievable happened. Every executive in the lobby bowed their heads slightly as Baraka passed. A terrified whisper spread among the workers nearby. Mzee Mwinyi, the founder, the owner. Mwanajuma felt her knees weaken. No. Impossible. Her eyes filled with confusion while memories crashed violently through her mind. The old man beside the roadside, the blanket, the tea at the bus station, the trembling hands accepting bread. And suddenly, everything shattered into terrifying clarity. Baraka stopped directly in front of her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then softly, he said, "I owe you an apology." Mwanajuma stared at him speechlessly. "You." Her voice barely worked. "You are Baraka Muini." The billionaire owner of the entire hotel empire stood before her quietly while the entire lobby watched in stunned silence. Mwanajuma stepped backward instinctively. Her heart pounded violently now. "You lied to me." Pain flickered briefly across Baraka's face. "Yes." Tears immediately filled her eyes again, not because of anger alone, because she suddenly felt foolish. Every conversation, every moment of pity, every sacrifice she made for him while her own family suffered, all while he secretly possessed unimaginable wealth. "I don't understand," she whispered shakily. Before Baraka could answer, another voice interrupted sharply. "Sir, Jabari." The manager approached slowly through the silent lobby, his face pale beneath the bright chandelier lights. For the first time since Mwanajuma met him, fear completely controlled his expression. "Mzee Mwini Jabari," said carefully, forcing a smile. "If we had known you were visiting—" "That is precisely the point," Baraka interrupted calmly. The silence afterward became suffocating. Jabari swallowed hard. Workers nearby stared openly now. Nobody could believe what they were witnessing. Baraka slowly turned toward the hotel staff gathered across the lobby. Then his eyes returned to Jabari. "I came here disguised as a poor man," he said quietly, "because I wanted to see how this hotel treats people without power." Jabari's breathing became visibly uneven. "Mzee Mwinyi." "I can explain. I watched workers humiliated publicly." Baraka's voice remained calm, controlled, far more terrifying than shouting. "I watched security guards abuse homeless people." Each sentence tightened fear further across Jabari's face. "I watched kindness punished while cruelty was rewarded." Mwanajuma stood frozen beside the lobby entrance, struggling to process everything happening around her. The old man she defended, the man she fed while sacrificing clinic money, the man sleeping near bus stations. He owned everything. Baraka looked toward her again, and I watched one poor waitress risk everything she had to protect another human being. Several workers lowered their eyes immediately in shame, because they remembered every moment they stayed silent. Jabari tried speaking again. "Sir, this employee has already been suspended for theft pending investigation." Baraka's expression changed instantly. Cold disappointment entered his eyes. "You accuse her of stealing." "There is evidence, false evidence." Jabari froze. Baraka stepped closer slowly. "You made one mistake, Jabari," he said quietly. "You believed poor people cannot be trusted." The manager's face had become drenched in sweat now. "But you never imagined someone richer than you might be watching." Silence crashed heavily across the entire lobby. No worker moved, no executive spoke. Even wealthy guests nearby sensed something historic unfolding before them. Then Baraka gave one final instruction calmly. "Gather all department heads in the executive conference room immediately." Nobody hesitated. Executives moved instantly. Security guards straightened sharply. And for the first time since entering Bahari Grand Hotel, Jabari Matemvu fully understood the terrible truth. The homeless old man he humiliated for weeks was not powerless. He was the most powerful man in the entire empire. And now, everything was about to collapse. The executive conference room on the top floor of Bahari Grand Hotel had always been reserved for powerful people. Government ministers signed contracts there. Foreign investors negotiated million-dollar partnerships there. Senior executives celebrated profits there. But tonight the atmosphere inside the room felt nothing like power. It felt like judgment. A long, polished table stretched beneath golden ceiling lights, while security guards stood silently near every exit. Thick folders covered the table surface beside laptops, financial reports, and printed photographs. Department heads sat stiffly in expensive chairs. Nobody relaxed. Nobody even touched the bottled water placed before them. At the head of the table sat Mzee Baraka Mwinyi. calm, silent, terrifying. Jabari sat 3 seats away, trying desperately to appear composed. But sweat darkened his collar, and his hands would not stop trembling beneath the table. Near the back wall, Mwanajuma stood quietly beside Omari, and several lower workers invited unexpectedly into the meeting. She still struggled to process everything. Baraka's true identity, the hidden investigation, the entire hotel bowing before the homeless old man she once wrapped in her father's blanket. Part of her still felt hurt, part of her felt embarrassed, and another part could not stop remembering him sitting weakly beneath the abandoned bus shelter while she spent her family's last money on medicine. Baraka slowly looked around the room. For months, he began quietly. I lived among poor people outside properties owned by my company. No one interrupted. I slept near bus stations. I sat outside hotel entrances. I listened to workers, guards, cleaners, drivers, and street vendors. His voice remained calm, but every sentence felt heavy. And what I discovered shamed me. Silence deepened. Baraka opened one of the folders slowly. This company was built by ordinary people, not politicians, not executives, ordinary workers. His eyes lifted toward the managers around the table. But somewhere along the way, many of you stopped seeing human beings. Jabari lowered his eyes immediately. Baraka continued. You saw status, wealth, appearance, fear. He paused briefly. And those without power became invisible. Mwanajuma felt emotion tighten painfully inside her chest. Because he understood. He truly understood. Baraka pressed a button on the conference remote. A large screen lit up behind him. Video footage appeared. Security guards shoving homeless people away from hotel property. Managers insulting cleaners publicly. Workers being threatened. Then another clip. Jabari throwing Mwanajuma's tray into the puddle beside the road. The room became unbearably silent. Several executives shifted uncomfortably. Jabari's face turned pale. Mwinyi. He began shakily. These situations were misunderstood. Be quiet. The calmness in Baraka's voice felt colder than rage. Jabari immediately fell silent. Another document appeared on the screen. Bank transfers, false supplier invoices, unauthorized expense accounts. Baraka folded his hands slowly. For nearly 2 years, he said quietly, money disappeared from Bahari Grand Hotel through fraudulent contracts and false maintenance reports. The directors around the table exchanged tense looks. Jabari's breathing became uneven now. One financial auditor stood carefully. We traced the stolen funds through 3 shell companies connected indirectly to manager Jabari Mtemvu. Shock spread visibly across several department heads. Even workers near the wall gasped softly. Jabari stood suddenly. This is ridiculous. Security guards moved immediately toward him. You are framing me. Baraka's expression never changed. Sit down. For several seconds, Jabari remained standing defiantly. Then slowly he obeyed. Because for the first time in years, power no longer protected him. Baraka turned toward Mwanajuma unexpectedly. Do you know why I hid my identity? Every eye in the room shifted toward her. Mwanajuma swallowed nervously. No. Baraka became quiet for several moments. Then slowly, he removed his glasses. When I was 12 years old, he said softly, my mother became sick. The room remained completely silent now. We traveled to a private hospital near Bagamoyo asking for help. His voice tightened slightly. But the staff ignored us because we looked poor. Pain flickered behind his eyes. They made us wait outside for hours while wealthy families entered before us. Mwanajuma felt tears rising immediately. I still remember my mother apologizing to me for being poor. Even several executives lowered their eyes now. She died before sunrise. The silence afterward felt devastating. Baraka stared down briefly at the table before continuing. I built this company because I promised myself no human being would ever feel worthless near something carrying my name. His gaze slowly hardened again, but I failed. Nobody dared speak. Baraka looked directly at Jabari. You became exactly the kind of man who destroyed my mother. The words hit the room like thunder. Jabari's face collapsed completely. Mwinyi, please no. For the first time, real emotion entered Baraka's voice. Not anger alone, grief. You humiliated hungry people publicly. His breathing deepened slightly. You punished kindness. You treated poverty like disease. Jabari's eyes filled with panic. I was protecting the hotel image. No, Baraka replied coldly. You were protecting your ego. The room fell silent again. Then another executive opened a separate folder carefully. There is more. He handed documents toward Baraka. These testimonies came from junior workers this afternoon. Mwanajuma noticed Omari tense beside her immediately. Baraka read quietly for several moments. Then he looked up slowly. Several employees confirmed Jabari forced them to falsify inventory reports. Jabari slammed both hands against the table. They're lying. Because they fear you, Baraka replied sharply. The manager's breathing became frantic now. Everyone here knows how business works. Pressure comes from above. Investors expect perfection, and so you stole. I deserved more. Jabari shouted suddenly. The outburst shocked the entire room. Years of bitterness exploded from him uncontrollably now. I built this hotel while executives lived comfortably. I sacrificed everything for this place. Baraka stared at him silently. And still he said quietly, You chose cruelty. Jabari's anger slowly cracked into desperation. You don't understand what it means to rise from nothing. Something changed in Baraka's face immediately. Cold disappointment. I understand poverty better than you ever will. Silence crushed the room once again, because everyone suddenly realized something important. Jabari had forgotten where he came from, but Baraka never did. After a long pause, Baraka finally stood. The entire room straightened instinctively. Mwanajuma. She looked up nervously. Yes. Baraka's expression softened slightly. I owe you more than apology. Emotion tightened in her throat immediately. You reminded me what this company was supposed to become. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. Because despite all the suffering, despite the humiliation and accusations, the old billionaire still saw her kindness as something valuable. Not weakness, not foolishness. Valuable. Baraka slowly faced the executives again. Effective immediately, he announced calmly, Manager Jabari Mtemvu is suspended pending criminal investigation for fraud, abuse of staff, and financial theft. Jabari's face lost all remaining color. No! Security guards stepped forward immediately. Panic finally broke through his composure completely. You can't do this. But nobody moved to help him. Not one executive, not one worker, because fear had finally changed sides. And as guards escorted the once powerful manager toward the conference room doors, Jabari turned desperately toward Mwanajuma. For one brief second their eyes met. The waitress he humiliated, the poor woman he framed, the employee he believed powerless. And suddenly he understood the truth too late. The weakest person in the room had become the strongest witness against him. News of Jabari Mtemvu's suspension spread across Bahari Grand Hotel before sunrise. By morning, every corridor buzzed with whispers. Workers gathered secretly near laundry rooms and kitchen stations, exchanging shocked rumors while pretending to continue cleaning duties. Some spoke with excitement, others with fear. Because when powerful people finally fell, everyone started wondering whose name would be next. Inside the executive wing company, auditors moved between offices carrying sealed boxes filled with financial records and computer drives. Security guards remained stationed outside Jabari's office, while nervous managers avoided eye contact with investigators. The atmosphere no longer felt luxurious, it felt exposed. And somewhere beneath that fear, truth slowly began breathing again. Mwanajuma returned home after the conference meeting emotionally exhausted. Her entire body still struggled to understand what happened. Baraka was the owner. Jabari was under investigation. And somehow her small acts of kindness had become central to everything unfolding inside the hotel. Yet despite all that, life inside Tandale remained painfully unchanged. Birahema still coughed through the night. The rent remained unpaid. And Salaam still faced losing his school exams. That reality grounded Mwanajuma quickly. Wealthy people could survive humiliation. Poor people still needed breakfast the next morning. As sunlight entered through cracks in the cement walls, Salem watched his sister quietly preparing tea. So, the old man was really a billionaire, Mwanajuma nodded slowly. The boy shook his head in disbelief. You gave your blanket to a billionaire. A weak smile touched her face briefly. At the time, he was still cold. Salem stared at her for several seconds before laughing softly for the first time in days. You really are strange. Birahema looked toward her daughter carefully. No, she whispered. She is rare. The word stayed with Mwanajuma long after leaving the house that morning. Rare. Nobody had ever described her that way before. Most people called her poor, tired, naive, weak, but not rare. Back at Bahari Grand Hotel, chaos continued growing. Several accounting staff members were already suspended. Suppliers arrived angrily demanding explanations about unpaid contracts. Rumors spread that police investigators might soon become involved. And hidden beneath all that panic lived another dangerous emotion, desperation, especially inside Jabari. Especially, the former manager now sat alone inside a private holding office on the executive floor under quiet supervision from company security. His expensive suit looked wrinkled. His eyes were bloodshot from sleeplessness. For the first time in years, nobody obeyed him, nobody feared him, and without fear, he suddenly looked much smaller. A knock sounded softly against the office door. Omari entered carrying documents under supervision from security. Jabari's eyes narrowed immediately. You. Omari remained near the doorway nervously. I was asked to bring inventory records. Jabari laughed bitterly. So now dishwashers work with executives. Omari said nothing, because deep inside fear still existed. Cruel people left scars long after losing power. Jabari leaned forward slowly. You think they care about you now? He asked quietly. When this scandal ends, you'll still be poor. Omari's hands tightened around the files. At least I won't be cruel. The word shocked even him. Jabari's expression darkened instantly. You ungrateful boy. I gave people jobs here. You gave people fear. Silence crashed between them. For one dangerous moment, Jabari looked ready to explode. Then suddenly, his face changed, almost pleading. You don't understand pressure, he whispered bitterly. Those executives demanded impossible standards every day. Omari hesitated, because for the first time, Jabari sounded less like a monster and more like a broken man drowning beneath his own ambition. You could have stayed kind, Omari said softly. The former manager looked away immediately, as if those words hurt more than accusations. Later that afternoon, Baraka called another closed meeting with selected workers and investigators. This time he invited not only executives, but also cleaners, kitchen staff guards, and junior employees. Workers entered nervously. Most had never stepped inside executive conference rooms before. Mwanajuma sat quietly near the far end of the table while Baraka reviewed testimony files beside Nima Kweka. One by one, workers began speaking. A cleaner described managers insulting staff publicly. A receptionist admitted guest complaints from poor visitors were intentionally ignored. One guard confessed they were ordered to remove homeless people violently before important events. And each testimony revealed the same pattern. Fear, silence, humiliation. Finally, Baraka looked toward Omari. You requested to speak privately. The young dishwasher swallowed hard. Every eye in the room turned toward him, including Mwanajuma's. Omari's hands trembled visibly now. Then slowly he stood. Manager Jabari forced some workers to falsify inventory reports he admitted quietly. Silence spread instantly. Omari lowered his eyes. He said missing supplies needed explanations for auditors. His breathing became shaky. Sometimes he blamed workers already considered troublesome. Mwanajuma immediately understood. That's why he framed me. Omari nodded painfully. I'm sorry. Tears filled his eyes suddenly. I should have spoken earlier. Baraka watched him carefully. Why didn't you? Omari's answer came almost immediately. Because poor people cannot survive unemployment. The room fell silent again. Because everyone understood. Fear fed corruption. Not just greed, not just ambition. Fear. Fear of hunger. Fear of losing rent money. Fear of becoming invisible. Baraka slowly folded his hands together. That fear ends now. His voice remained calm but powerful. No employee inside my company will ever again be punished for speaking truth. Several workers looked stunned, some emotional. One cleaner quietly wiped tears from her eyes. Baraka stood slowly and walked toward the conference room window overlooking Dar es Salaam. Below, traffic moved endlessly through the city, while ordinary people continued struggling through another difficult day. I built hotels, he said quietly, because I wanted African workers treated with dignity inside African businesses. He turned back toward the room, but somewhere along the way, success became more important than humanity. His eyes slowly found Mwanajuma again. And it took a poor waitress to remind me what leadership actually means. Emotion tightened in her chest immediately. Not pride. Something deeper. Validation. For the first time in her life, someone powerful looked at her kindness as strength instead of weakness. Suddenly, the conference room doors opened sharply. Everyone turned. A security officer stepped inside quickly. Mzee Mwinyi, there's a problem. Baraka's expression hardened immediately. What happened? The guard hesitated. Jabari requested permission to leave the building for medical reasons. He paused. But investigators discovered missing files from accounting storage. Fear moved across the room instantly. Nima stood sharply. What files, supplier, transfer records? Baraka's eyes narrowed. He's trying to destroy evidence. At that exact moment, alarms suddenly echoed through the executive hallway outside. Workers jumped in shock. Security radios exploded with urgent voices. Then another guard rushed into the room breathlessly. He's gone! Silence crashed violently across the conference room. Jabari Matemvu had disappeared. And somewhere beyond the glowing skyline of Dar es Salaam, a desperate man was now running from the empire he once believed he controlled. Rain hammered against the windows of Bahari Grand Hotel as tension swallowed the entire building. Outside, flashes of lightning cut across the dark Dar es Salaam sky, while police vehicles and private security teams searched roads surrounding the city. Inside the executive conference hall, nobody sat comfortably anymore. Jabari's escape had transformed the corruption investigation into something far larger than a workplace scandal. Now it felt criminal, dangerous, personal. Mwanajuma stood quietly near the back of the room, watching exhausted executives speak urgently into phones while auditors sorted through stolen financial records spread across the table. Baraka remained calmer than everyone else, but beneath that calmness lived visible disappointment, not only toward Jabari, toward himself. Because the empire he built with pride had quietly become infected with fear and greed while he remained emotionally distant for years. Nima approached him carefully. Police tracked one company vehicle heading toward Bagamoyo Road, she whispered. Baraka nodded slowly. He's desperate now. We also recovered deleted accounting files from hotel servers. Enough evidence for fraud charges, yes. She paused briefly. But he may still try destroying witness credibility. Baraka's eyes shifted briefly toward Mwanajuma across the room. And suddenly, Nima understood. He blames her most. The billionaire's expression hardened slightly. No one touches that girl again. At that exact moment, Mwanajuma's phone vibrated violently in her hands. Salaam. Fear hit her instantly before answering. Salaam. His voice sounded panicked. Mama collapsed again. The room around Mwanajuma disappeared instantly. What happened? She stopped breathing properly after coughing. Cold terror flooded through her body. We're taking her to the clinic now, Salaam whispered shakily. But they said we need money first. Mwanajuma closed her eyes painfully. Not again. Please, not now. She looked up helplessly across the conference room. Baraka immediately understood something was wrong. Within seconds, he crossed the room toward her. What happened? My mother... Her voice broke completely. She collapsed. Baraka did not hesitate. Get the car. Everything moved quickly afterward. Luxury elevators, security escorts, rain crashing against black SUVs outside the hotel entrance. Mwanajuma sat trembling in the back seat while the city blurred through wet windows around them. For the first time in days, she no longer cared about investigations or executives or stolen money. She only wanted her mother alive. The small private clinic near Tandale overflowed with noise and chaos when they arrived. Crying children, overworked nurses, patients crowded along narrow hallways. The smell of medicine and rainwater filled the air. Mwanajuma rushed inside immediately. Salaam stood near the waiting area soaked from rain. Mama is inside. They hurried together toward the treatment room. Birahema lay weakly on a hospital bed connected to oxygen while nurses moved around her quickly. A doctor approached with tired eyes. She has severe respiratory infection complications, he explained. Why was treatment interrupted? Shame crushed Mwanajuma instantly. We couldn't pay. The doctor looked frustrated but unsurprised, because poverty explained too many tragedies inside places like this. Before Mwanajuma could speak further, Baraka stepped forward quietly. Give her whatever treatment she needs. The doctor frowned slightly. The costs may become expensive. I said whatever she needs. Something in Baraka's voice changed the entire atmosphere immediately. The doctor nodded quickly. Yes, sir. As nurses rushed to continue treatment, Mwanajuma slowly sat beside her mother's bed, trembling with emotional exhaustion. Baraka remained nearby silently. Finally, she looked toward him. You didn't have to come. Yes, he answered softly. I did. Rain continued pounding outside the clinic windows while weak fluorescent lights flickered overhead. For several moments, neither spoke. Then suddenly, Mwanajuma whispered something unexpected. I was angry at you. Baraka nodded slowly. You had every right. You watched me suffer while hiding the truth. Pain crossed his face briefly. I know. Mwanajuma lowered her eyes. I thought you trusted me. I did trust you. His voice became quieter. That was the problem. She looked confused. Baraka slowly sat beside her. When people know wealth is watching them, he explained carefully, they perform kindness. He paused. But you showed kindness when you believed nobody important would ever notice. Silence settled between them. Then Baraka spoke again. When you gave me your father's blanket, his voice tightened slightly. I realized you possessed something richer than money. Tears slowly filled Mwanajuma's eyes. My mother used to say poor people survive through each other. Baraka smiled sadly. My mother believed the same thing. The clinic room became quiet except for B. Rahema's weak breathing machine. Then after a long silence, Baraka finally revealed the truth he had hidden deepest inside himself. The night my mother died, he whispered a hospital worker pushed her away from the entrance because her clothes looked dirty. Mwanajuma's heart broke immediately, hearing the pain inside his voice. I was 12 years old. His eyes stared somewhere far away now. I remember holding her hand outside in the rain while wealthy patients walked past us. Lightning flashed outside the clinic windows. She apologized to me before dying. Baraka continued quietly. She said she was sorry I was born poor. Tears rolled silently down Mwanajuma's face, because suddenly she understood. This entire investigation, the disguise, the streets, the hotel, it was never only about corruption, it was grief. Old grief that never healed. Baraka looked toward B. Rahema's bed. I built hotels because I wanted poor people treated with dignity. His voice cracked slightly. But somewhere along the way, I became distant from the very suffering I promised never to forget. Before Mwanajuma could answer, loud footsteps suddenly echoed through the clinic hallway outside. Security guards entered quickly. Nima followed behind them, soaked from rain. We found Jabari. The room became silent immediately. Where hiding at a guest house near the highway? Baraka stood slowly. Nima hesitated briefly before continuing. He tried burning financial records. Mwanajuma closed her eyes. Even now, he still chose destruction. But there's more, Nima added quietly. He wants to speak before police questioning. Her eyes shifted toward Mwanajuma, specifically to her. Fear tightened inside the room instantly. Baraka's expression darkened immediately. No. Nima lowered her voice. He says he'll confess everything publicly, but only if Mwanajuma hears him first. Rain crashed harder outside. Inside the clinic room, tension returned like a storm. Because after everything that happened, the cruel manager who destroyed countless lives finally wanted to face the woman he once believed powerless. And somewhere deep inside herself, Mwanajuma realized this final confrontation was no longer only about justice. It was about whether broken people could still recognize their own humanity before it was too late. The rain finally stopped just before sunrise. Dar es Salaam woke slowly beneath pale golden light, while water dripped from rooftops and crowded streets began filling again with buses, motorcycles, and market vendors preparing for another difficult day. But inside the private holding room at Bahari Grand Hotel, nobody felt ready for a new beginning. Jabari Matemvu sat alone at the metal table staring at his trembling hands. He had not slept, not after the arrest, not after the investigators recovered burned financial documents from the guest house fireplace, and especially not after hours alone with his own thoughts. For years he convinced himself cruelty was necessary. That fear created discipline. That humiliation created strength. But now, sitting without expensive suits authority or terrified workers around him, another truth finally stood before him. He had become the very thing he once hated. A man who crushed weaker people simply because he finally possessed power himself. The door opened quietly. Mwanajuma entered first. Behind her stood Baraka and Nima. Jabari slowly lifted his eyes. For several seconds, silence filled the room. Then unexpectedly, Jabari stood, not proudly, not angrily, broken. I asked to see you because, his voice cracked slightly, because I cannot carry the shame without saying the truth. Mwanajuma remained silent. Jabari looked directly at her for the first time without arrogance. When I was a child, he whispered, my mother cleaned hotel bathrooms in Arusha. Pain flickered across his tired face. She used to come home crying because rich guests insulted her every day. Mwanajuma felt her chest tighten. I promised myself I would never become weak like her. His breathing became uneven. Then one day I gained authority, and slowly I became worse than the people who humiliated her. The room remained painfully quiet. Jabari looked toward Baraka. I stole money. His voice shook now. But the worst thing I stole was dignity from people. Tears gathered in his eyes suddenly. I made poor workers feel worthless because I was terrified of becoming poor again myself. Baraka watched him silently, not with hatred, with sadness, because he recognized that fear too well. Jabari slowly turned back toward Mwanajuma. You showed kindness when everyone else stayed silent. He lowered his head painfully. And I punished you for it. Mwanajuma felt tears rise unexpectedly, not because she forgave him completely, because she suddenly saw something tragic. Cruel people were often wounded people who never healed correctly. After a long silence, Jabari whispered one final sentence. I am sorry. Real silence followed afterward, heavy, honest. Then Baraka finally spoke. You cannot erase suffering, he said quietly, but you can stop creating more of it. Jabari slowly nodded while tears rolled freely down his face. 2 hours later, police formally escorted him from Bahari Grand Hotel. No workers celebrated loudly. No one mocked him. Because deep down, many understood how easily fear and ambition could poison human beings. But justice still mattered. And for the first time in years, justice had finally arrived. Over the following weeks, Bahari Grand Hotel transformed completely. Corporate investigations spread through multiple branches of the Mwini Hospitality Group. Several corrupt managers lost positions. Stolen funds were recovered. Workers previously silenced by fear finally spoke openly about abuse inside the company. Baraka personally ordered new protections for employees, anonymous reporting systems, medical support for lower workers, education assistance for employees' children, and most importantly, mandatory dignity training for every manager across the company. Luxury means nothing, he told executives during one meeting, if humanity disappears from the building. Meanwhile, life changed quietly for Mwanajuma too. Birahema received proper treatment at one of the best hospitals in the city, fully covered by the company. Slowly, her strength began returning. Salaam's school fees were paid, and for the first time in months, laughter occasionally returned to their small home in Tandale. One evening, while helping her mother prepare tea, Salaam grinned suddenly. So, he said carefully, does this mean we are rich now? Mwanajuma laughed softly. No, But the billionaire likes you. Birahema smiled weakly from her chair. He respects her, she corrected gently. That matters more. And she was right, because the relationship between Baraka and Mwanajuma became something deeper than charity, something quieter. A bond built through suffering honesty and shared understanding. Baraka often visited Tandal now, without security convoys or expensive attention. Sometimes he sat outside their small house drinking tea with Salaam while neighborhood children stared in disbelief. Other times he simply listened while Birahema told stories about Mwanajuma's childhood. For the first time since his wife's death, loneliness slowly loosened its grip around him. And for the first time in her life, Mwanajuma felt seen by someone powerful without feeling small beside them. 3 months later, Bahari Grand Hotel hosted another public event. But this time the atmosphere felt different, warmer. Workers smiled naturally instead of fearfully. Security guards greeted street vendors respectfully near the entrance. Leftover food programs were organized daily for shelters around the city. And standing near the ballroom stage beneath golden lights was Mwanajuma herself, wearing a beautiful navy blue uniform designed for her new role. Community Relations Director. She still could barely believe it. Hundreds of guests filled the ballroom while cameras flashed across the room. Executives, politicians, journalists, and workers all waited as Baraka slowly stepped onto the stage. The room became silent immediately. He looked older now, somehow, softer too, but his voice remained powerful. People often believe successful businesses are built through money, he began calmly, but money alone builds nothing lasting. His eyes slowly found Mwanajuma standing nearby. This company nearly lost its soul because too many people forgot the value of human dignity. Silence spread across the ballroom. Months ago, a poor waitress chose kindness toward a homeless stranger while others looked away. Emotion tightened inside Mwanajuma's throat instantly. She expected no reward. Baraka's voice softened. No recognition, no advantage. Then he smiled gently. And that is exactly why she deserved all three. The entire ballroom erupted into applause. Workers stood first, then executives, then guests. Mwanajuma covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes completely. Not tears of humiliation this time. Healing. Baraka extended his hand toward her. The future of this company, he declared proudly, belongs to people who never stop seeing humanity in others. Mwanajuma slowly walked toward the stage while applause thundered around her. And somewhere deep inside the crowd, several workers who once stayed silent finally understood something important. Kindness was never weakness. Sometimes, it was the most powerful thing in the world. After all the pain, humiliation, fear, and injustice, one truth remained stronger than everything else. Human dignity matters more than wealth, status, or power. This story reminds us that the world often ignores poor people until someone brave chooses compassion instead of silence. Mwanajuma had no money, no influence, and no protection. Yet her kindness changed an entire empire because genuine humanity carries a power that cruelty can never destroy. Many people become hard after suffering. Some become selfish because they fear poverty. Others stop caring because the world once stopped caring about them. But healing begins when even one person refuses to let pain turn them cruel. Mzibaraka Mwini discovered that success without compassion becomes emptiness. Jabari learned too late that fear and ambition can slowly poison the soul, and Mwanajuma proved that even the poorest heart can still become a light for others. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from and what lessons stayed inside your heart the most. And if you believe stories about justice, hope, healing, and African resilience deserve to be shared with the world, please subscribe, like, and share this story with someone who needs encouragement today. Because sometimes, one act of kindness can save more lives than we ever imagine.